Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Martina James. I'm with the Virginia Governor's Conference on Aging. I want to thank you so much for joining us. And as everyone pops into the room, I just want to remind everyone that our webinar information, recordings, upcoming webinars, information about the conference in general is always available at the Virginia Governor's Conference on Aging website, vgcoa.com. Our webinar series is the fourth Tuesday of every month from 1 to 2 p.m. We're always looking for great new webinar topics. So if you have any suggestions, please feel free to reach out to me at martina@vgcoa.com. This month, we have Emily Braley with us, The Impact of Coronavirus on Social Isolation, a Creative Community Transportation Response. I'm really excited. Emily reached out and offered to do a presentation on volunteer transportation programs. And I think they really speak to the nature of a community. And so we're really thrilled to have her with us and have her talk about how this program really thrived during COVID-19, but also, how it's working to come out of COVID-19, how those communities are working together, how their volunteers are supporting their own communities within themselves. So I encourage everyone throughout the presentation to submit questions through our Q&A box. This is just a little slide to remind you. It's a lot easier if you can submit your questions in the Q&A box. You'll see that icon on the bottom right side. You can also use the raise hand icon. And of course, as always, the fire trucks come by at the beginning of every webinar. And use the raise hand icon at any point if you'd like to be able to unmute and ask your question live. Sometimes it's easier to ask your question than type it into the box, so we can unmute you and you can ask your question. And then if you just want to chat or share some thoughts, you can always enter those into the chat box or share an idea for an upcoming webinar. Feel free to send those via the chat box. But at this point, Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we're going to get your presentation up and let you take it away and let you have the show.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces, so hi to everybody I know from Northern Virginia area. I'm the manager of NV Rides, which is a volunteer rides program in the Northern Virginia region. And I know a lot of you know about our program. So I'm going to give an overview and then I'll kind of do like a latest and greatest updates on what we did during coronavirus. And then I'll wrap it up with how you could potentially start a program like this in your region or community. Super informal, so feel free to drop what you want to talk about in the chat or ask a question, interrupt me. This is meant to be give and take, and everybody's community is unique, so I'll learn from you guys too. I'm excited to be here. So NV Rides, talking about coronavirus, social isolation, volunteer rides, a little bit of everything. So NV Rides, who are we? We are a conglomerate of community-based volunteer driving programs serving the Northern Virginia area. We have 15 partners and we're kind of all over Northern Virginia. We're in Arlington County, Prince William, Loudoun, and Fairfax. So kind of the counties right near Washington, DC. And we serve older adults, persons with disabilities, and we are kind of the partnership. We have 15 partners that are service providers, and we are the organization that advocates for them, provides central resources, and helps recruit volunteers, helps direct ride requests. We do it all. So we're called NV Rides. We are volunteer rides organizations in Northern Virginia. So who are we a little bit more? I always start out presentations with, we're not a medical transportation service. We don't do emergency rides. We don't do wheelchair rides. We don't do medical transport where the person needs a lot of physical lifting assistance. Our riders have to be ambulatory and able to get in a person's private vehicle. We are providing rides via volunteer rides network. So people who are driving their own private vehicle, background check volunteers, driving community members around. So it's got to be somebody who can get in a normal vehicle. Assistive devices are okay as long as the person can fold it or manage it themselves. So like a small oxygen tank or maybe a cane or like a folding walker that can fit in, like I think of, can it fit in a Prius is kind of our standard. It's got to be a little smaller car. We refer riders, so we get calls and we refer riders to network partners. So we have 15 partners that can be shepherd centers, mosques, synagogues, county community centers, villages, and then we help people connect to a rides program in their specific region or community. We're not means tested, which I think is really unique for a rides program. It's just older people or persons with disabilities, and we don't verify people's disabilities. There's not really a high, we're not really digging deep. If somebody says they have a disability, we take them at face value and we try and link them to a rides program. We don't check income, which you'll see later why that's important. We just help people who are seniors or persons with disabilities. Most of our partners require the rider to be over 55. And there's, of course, case-by-case basis. It's evaluated individually, but mostly over 55. Our rides are almost always free or very low cost. And when I say low cost, sometimes it's not that you're paying for the ride, but some of our village partners require membership in the village, which itself is an annual fee or billed monthly or billed every 6 months. Sometimes it's a sliding scale based on income. So that would kind of be the payment that you may make for your ride. But then typically individual rides are not charged with our partners. So it's very affordable for our riders. And like I said, we're not verifying income. And each partner has their own requirements to be a rider. So our drivers are volunteers. They are not compensated. They're not professional drivers. They're people who want to make a difference in their community. They can sign up. They either come through me with NV Rides, like they'll call myself or my colleague Julie and say, I want to volunteer. We'll find out where they live and their interests, and we'll connect them to a driving organization. Likewise, they'll sometimes go through the organization itself. They'll find out Shepherd Center has a rides program and they'll, say, I want to drive for you, or Reston Community Center or something like that. Or they're a member of a village and they want to do that. They sign up and then they go through a background check. We check criminal history and motor vehicle records, which is important, kind of makes people feel secure getting in the car. And then they enter the information, they become part of our cloud-based ride scheduling software. From this software, they're able to receive daily email blasts, or they can log in to check what rides are available, and they can hit accept from their email, or they can hit accept from logging on to our cloud-based ride scheduler system. The drivers use their own gas, their own car, and their own car insurance. This is such a common question, so I'll bring it up now, and then I think we'll probably talk about it more in like a Q&A, but basically drivers have to have their own insurance, and that's what pays first, like their own automobile insurance. But then the partner organization also has what we call umbrella insurance, which pays second, would be like a backup to the person's individual insurance. And then our cloud-based software allows for the drivers to track their miles and expenses, and we can generate tax documents for them from our ride scheduler. So it's 58 cents a mile. So people can, it's like a tax deductible, like charitable donation. So it's nice that we have this software. We know how long it's going to take. We know how it tracks how long they spend driving, tracks the mileage, it tracks the destination, it tracks the origin point, all of that. And we can provide this for the volunteers as a good ancillary benefit. A little bit more about our ride scheduler, and I'd love to, if people have specific questions, I know a lot about it, so I can kind of volley with you on that. But basically, it's a system where we enter ride requests and drivers and riders can look. Drivers can pick up the rides from the system. A transportation coordinator enters the rider's requests. It's all cloud-based. It can be logged into anywhere, like on your phone, at home, or whatever. So it's really convenient. It provides Google Maps estimates, time estimates, anything you can imagine, details about the ride, what type of ride, and then volunteers can decide whether or not to take it. And it's all tracked. So it's really easy to see where people are going and which requests are not met yet. So we can kind of email again and say, hey, can anyone drive so-and-so to the grocery store? So you're probably wondering who rides with us. And the answer is a lot of different people. We are fairly diverse because we have so many partners, like there's a lot of variability, but generally, we have good demographics from our ride scheduler system. So we have a lot of female head of households. We know women live longer. A lot of them report that they lack support systems. They don't have someone who they can call, quickly to help them. A lot of them have adult children who are somewhat available, but perhaps that like sandwich generation where they're pulled in a lot of different directions, full-time job, aging parents, young children. And they're not able to provide the transportation, particularly during like the 9 to 5 hours. Lots of widows and widowers. And what we find income-wise is that typically the people are not able to qualify for county or local government free transportation programs. They're on a fixed income that's a little bit too high. And so they're in this spot where they're not able to pay for Uber or Lyft or a yellow cab or even a neighbor who may, want gas reimbursement. But they are also not going to get free transportation from the county. And so it's this slightly above the poverty threshold. That's where people tend to be. And again, because we don't verify income, this is all self-reported. So this data is all from our riders telling us how much they earn if they choose to tell us that information. And a lot of them are on a fixed income and they're seniors. So it makes a big difference in their finances. I want to add anecdotally, I think we have a lot of extroverts. The people who do this or who want to be a rider or a driver are pretty outgoing. They're going to, meet a new person. They're going to socialize with them. They're going to get in their car, listen to music. So we have people who are kind of willing to put themselves out there and build community a little bit, which I think is fun. There's a certain personality of someone who wants to do this, and it's someone who wants to socialize in addition to getting their like basic needs met. So that's sort of an ancillary benefit, but it's a lot of socialization and community building in addition to getting ready to go. So that's our typical rider. I want to add too, because I think this makes us a little different than a lot of other programs, is most of our partners don't limit rides to medical rides. We take people to social outings, to Bridge, to the grocery store, to anything, you can imagine. Christmas shopping was a big one this year. So it's about building a full life. It's not only that we'll drive you to your doctor or your dentist. And I think that differentiates us. And it also means that it becomes a close-knit community. So drivers, I think with the pandemic, we've recruited some younger volunteers. With work from home, things have changed, but most of our drivers, the average age is 68. Most of them are recent retirees. They're looking to give back. They're looking to do something flexible. We don't have minimum requirements. If you drive once a year, you could still be a driver for us. I think the cool thing is a lot of people are really familiar with these programs because they themselves had a family member or loved one or neighbor who relied on them and they really want to give back. A lot of times somebody, is a caregiver for their parent. They need someone to stand in the gap. They can't take their parent to every single thing, and they're sort of helping and using volunteer ride programs kind of in tandem. And then that person, maybe no longer needs care. Maybe they move on to a nursing facility or something else. And then, their child or their caregiver suddenly has time, and people often give back at that point. They're like, this made such a big difference to my parent or my loved one, and now I want to do this for someone else. A lot of people have been touched by the services, which I think is really special. When we hear stories of why people want to volunteer, so many people mention that this allowed my mom to stay in her house an extra year. This allowed my dad to go to dialysis while I worked full time. There's a lot of stories like that. So it's pretty special. Also, a lot of our volunteers report that they're concerned themselves about aging in place, and they want programs like this to be there when they're older and maybe need them. So a lot of people support them just simply out of thinking that, in 10 years, my neighborhood, I hope we have something like this still. So they try and keep it going. And then a lot of people have elderly parents out of state who just receive like these type of services and realize that it allowed them to stay in their home community and they want to provide that. So they're really giving of their time. And in a lot of ways, it's an intimate volunteer experience. You're having someone in your car, you're taking them to doctor's appointments, you're taking them to the grocery store, you're in their life in a way. And a lot of our volunteers drive the same riders too. So that's pretty cool. They have these relationships. So NV Rides, what we do is we are not a ride provider. We support the ride providers and organize them. So we do the scheduling software. We train people, we do tech support, we answer questions. We're in regular contact with the guy who designed it, the programmer, and he helps us like customize it or adjust it as we need. We pay for and administer the volunteer driver background checks. So any organization that partners with us we fund the background checks, and we also have the account with the background check company. We use Sterling Volunteers and IntelliCorp background checks. And I can help if anybody afterwards wants to know how to like set up an account or work with them, I can help you or explain to you how to do it. We do marketing, things like events like this, where I talk about what volunteer driving is. This is part of what we do. We help recruit volunteers. We do program development. So we help people, secure funding for their organization. We can help with marketing for your organization. And then we manage a lot of calls of both clients and volunteers, and we triage them out to the appropriate organization or to like more formal government resources. If we get a call for like a wheelchair van or something, we link that person. One of the things that's really cool is we do not charge our partner organizations. We just have MOU, so a memorandum of understanding. We're funded through a partnership I'll explain later, but essentially we don't need to charge our partner organizations. We just provide these services, and we ask that they track and provide data so we can continue to fund and support their programs. So it's completely free to join our network. However, because of our grant, we are only in the Northern Virginia area and the counties I discussed. So here's who our partners are. Super diverse. You can see geographically, like culturally, like mission-wise, we are kind of all over the map. So we have some villages at home in Alexandria and Mount Vernon at home work with us. And then there's other villages in Northern Virginia that have their own volunteer rides programs that don't partner with us. There's Loudoun volunteer caregivers. There you can see there's a mosque and a bunch of shepherd centers, Herndon Village, Volunteer Prince William, Ruston Community Center, some synagogues. We're just very diverse, and we all share the same like central infrastructure, but then each organization kind of makes policies and procedures that make sense for them, and we let them do what they need to do. So it's a partnership, but we still give a lot of autonomy and direction to each partner organization. So ride trends, we had surprisingly a record year in 2021, even with all of the COVID changes. Felt like it was weekly for a while, vaccine rollouts, just everything that was going on, we kept going. And in Q4, we did 5,286 rides and deliveries. And then the whole year was 20,377. We saw ride trends were changing throughout the year, and we saw big increases in grocery shopping and food pantry deliveries. I think it's in speaking with our partners, and like there's probably multifactorial, but some of it was supply chain, like people who relied on maybe Amazon or Instacart weren't getting what they ordered anymore, or they weren't getting it quickly enough. They would place an order and it wouldn't come for 4 days, and they were running low on whatever. And so a lot of times they would ask people who were requesting rides to the grocery store just so they could get what they needed, because things weren't coming quickly anymore. A lot of homebound people rely on deliveries, as you know, and when those things are not happening quickly, people, they felt like they needed to venture out to meet their needs. We also started doing more pharmacy deliveries, and we also saw increases so as a lot of care went virtual, a lot more of our rides became things that had to be done in person, like physical therapy or dialysis, and a lot less became like routine, endocrinologist visits or things like that. So it changed a little bit, but we were moving. We moved a lot of people and a lot of things in 2021. So this is up through 2020, and 2021 needs to be updated, but you can see, medical and therapy are a little bit more than half, but we do a lot of other things. I think, like I mentioned, one thing that makes us really unique is we're not just, medical or basic needs. We make people able to live a whole life as they age in place. And part of living a whole life is being able to go to the mall and see people and socialize and run errands. So you can see we do a lot of friendly visitors and friendly calls. People come over or talk on the phone, depending on the preference, just to make sure people are feeling comfortable at home. We do handy helper, which is some of our partners offer that, where they do like light bulb changing, kind of at home computer stuff, little home updates, mall and shopping. We do socializing. We do job interviews, which I think is fun. We take people to interviews. Dental visits, and then kind of what if people ask for it, and our partners generally will try. So if people ask for a destination, we'll see what we can do. So we want to make people able to live a life beyond just attending medical appointments, and we try our best. So as I mentioned, it's a big thing for social isolation. I think all of us, even those of us who drive around all the time, probably felt a little isolated during COVID, especially the peak pandemic. And people who are homebound experience that all the time, but especially during the peak of the pandemic, when people weren't coming in their house, they may not have been getting their deliveries. So people felt very lonely, and our friendly visitor and friendly call program made a big difference. But also just our deliveries allowed people to have their basic needs met. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're not just rides, we're community building. And people really developed relationships that go way beyond transportation. And because of our micro communities, people tend to have a lot in common and really look out for each other. So I think that's kind of one of our unique features is we're 15 partners, but within each partner, they're their own communities. And the drivers tend to drive the same riders week after week. We tend to have these long relationships. You can see the little quote down there. It's one of our riders in Chantilly that just felt like, he said he felt like the people who drive him are like family, and he rides a lot. He needs to get where he needs to get a lot of places, and these people are helping him. One story I always think of is one of our riders had to move into a skilled nursing facility, but his driver kept coming at the same time every week that he was actually driving him. He just visited him at the nursing facility. They liked the same kind of music, and they got along. So there was a friendship that lasted way beyond when this man needed rides. So really special. So the pandemic did allow us, I alluded to it earlier, but work from home is great for us because people suddenly have an hour at lunch. They can drive someone, especially if it's in their neighborhood. So we've been able to get some younger volunteers. And I think people with the pandemic also realized how isolated people can be and their neighbors, and people wanted to give back. So this was a big deal to kind of recruit people in that way. And people are seeking connection. The pandemic was really isolating. So we had challenges too. I'm sure you all, every organization, I would love to hear what everybody else has been going through with COVID. But almost all of our riders and drivers are high risk for COVID. They were the people who were advised like most not to go out. They were the highest risk for everything. They got vaccinated first, but they were the highest risk. Our average age of drivers is like 67 or 68, depending on how I round. So it's older people who are high risk. A lot of in-person things were suspended. A lot of the communities that people would maybe be part of weren't meeting in person anymore. A lot of medical offices were closed, so mostly virtual visits. A lot of volunteers were afraid at first, rightfully so, and they didn't want to drive. The requests would keep coming and we didn't have volunteers, and we weren't able to do outreach like we would normally do because a lot of the things that we would go to, are not happening in person. That has somewhat changed. Of course, Omicron kind of slid back, and then now we're, maybe getting over that, and we sort of have to. I think we're all adapting, and the only constant is change. So who knows? But right now, things are sort of looking a little bit better, and people are starting to feel like they can come back and either volunteer, or doctors' offices now want to see people in person. So things are improving, but we definitely had challenges. So we had to pivot during the pandemic. I think everyone did. And we did a lot more friendly caller programs, because people who normally would get a ride every Sunday or whatever day they had suddenly weren't getting a ride, and we didn't know what was going on with them. And they wanted, they wanted that connection. They wanted someone to know they were okay that week. So we did a lot more friendly callers. Grocery and pharmacy delivery are huge for a lot of reasons. Pharmacy delivery was interesting because a lot of people did virtual visits, and then they would get a prescription, but they were homebound and the pharmacies were short staffed. And so we actually managed to pull off same day pharmacy delivery sometimes, which kudos to our incredible volunteers. We were able to get things that people had prescribed in a virtual visit like that morning. Some of our programs really stopped driving for a while. And so one of my roles, or my colleague, our ride coordinator, was to try and transfer clients or find alternate resources to get them through. And then a lot of our partners are not just ride providing organizations. They're villages, they're shepherd centers, and they have other things, like they do lunch and learn, they do community events, they do a Christmas party, and those things were on Zoom. So a lot of the times that we'd be like recruiting volunteers and building community weren't happening. So Zoom was great. I feel like everybody got a crash course in Zoom. A lot of our partners started doing food deliveries because the demand was there and we met the need. There was some redeployment of county vehicles for medical care appointments. And then a lot of faith communities just stepped up and moved mountains and got people recruited and got people driving. So it was, sometimes we sort of thought of contactless driving as the gateway. We'd get people to do some contactless drives. They would love the positive reinforcement, and then they say, you know what, I can drive people to dialysis. I feel good about this. So we had a lot more diverse volunteer opportunities, and I think that helped our overall volunteer pipeline. I'm happy to share more about that. So we had pandemic protocols, and every organization has their own. Your organization probably has their own too. So health screening, one of our strengths pre-pandemic was the rider could sit in the front. It felt like a family member driving you, but with the pandemic, we asked most people to sit in the back. Most doctors' offices didn't allow our drivers to accompany the rider anymore, so that was a big change. We did a lot of how to sanitize your vehicle, and then if it was warm, we said roll your windows down. It'll help. So a lot of people rode around with their windows down. This is our COVID-19 support. So there was some neighbor to neighbor shopping, food delivery. Fast Tran was helping provide rides if a ride wasn't filled. So we had a lot of support. One of the things that I think was our strength, and it's still our strength now, is that we have a lot of good technology. So we have this cloud-based ride scheduler. People can access it from anywhere. So even if people aren't coming into an office, it's still possible to see what's available, enter rides, take rides, cancel rides. And volunteers were connected. They get the email still. So they would know, like, you know what, there still is a need. I need to go out there and drive because there's people who are asking. So our software is fabulous, and it really helps us stay on track. So our partnership and how we're funded, a little bit more information. So the Poses Jewish Community Center of Northern Virginia is housed, that's where our program is housed. And the Jewish Council on Aging in Fairfax County provide funding. We also get funding from an FTA grant for enhanced mobility. So that helps pay for our programs. We are always trying, our needs are always evolving, and there's always, the pandemic redistributed where people live and how people live a lot. So there's new centers of gravity. More people live in different areas than they did before. So we're always looking for where we're getting a lot of calls and where the demand is, and do we have partners to meet those demands. So right now we're seeing different areas calling us and higher needs, and we know that that's a place we need to focus on. So it's always changing, and we always are trying to meet the community's need and find out what people are asking for and do it. So we learn a lot from the large volume of calls we get. So one of the things I think is really cool that was surprising to me when I came into this job is we had a doctoral student who studied our program last year. She's now a professor of occupational therapy at Texas Tech, and I can drop her thesis in the comments, but she essentially studied our program and wrote her thesis on it. And she found that she compared North Texas, where she lives, to the regions that we operate in for community engagement. And she started a little bit before the pandemic collecting her data, and then the pandemic hit, and our area, suddenly lost access to volunteer transportation. And it was like a natural randomized controlled trial. And she found that people who suddenly lost access had huge drops in community engagement, but in scores. But this didn't happen in Texas because they didn't have a volunteer transportation program. They still continue to have the same level of community engagement. And I'll go to the next slide for results. It's really word heavy, but essentially we are an essential service. We allow people to age in place. People were not able to meet their needs. People who depended on us were not able to meet their needs and stay engaged in the community when we were not operating. So thank goodness we're back and operating. And she kind of provided the like scientific proof. I think I felt like I needed to understand how impactful we are to the people we serve. And she's a great resource because she's an academic on this topic. And if you are looking for to pitch this to your community, this may be a good resource just because she has really good data on how impactful we are. And she can be a good resource to help you craft your argument or get your funding. I know she's helped me a lot. So her next steps once she saw this was that her community needs this. She's an occupational therapist in North Texas. She is working on starting a program in North Texas that's basically modeled on ours. And she's going to study how it affects community engagement. So there's more work in this area, and she's a real subject matter expert. So I'm sure everyone is interested to know, how do you do this in your community, or how could you do this? And full disclosure, I was not part of starting NV Rides in 2014. I give so much credit to my predecessors and all the partners in Fairfax County where it started. I was actually working as an RN then, so a totally different kind of thing. But I learned a lot from talking to people, and here's kind of my takeaways. And if anyone wants to jump in with how they did it, and you have more experience than me, I defer to your expertise. But here's what I've learned. So everybody told me to start small, and that's can be really small, like 5 or 10 people. Look at a specific neighborhood, maybe your HOA, a congregation, a community group where people know each other. It's hard to start big with strangers driving strangers. It's hard to get people motivated that way. So it's better to start in like a hyper local, tiny community where people, even if they don't know each other well, they're in some way connected to one another, perhaps a faith group, perhaps a shepherd center where people already are attending lunch and learns together and have that sort of acquaintance social connection. Start with just a few people and prove that it can work. Prove that you can organize it, that it's safe, that it gets people where they need to go, and that it meets their needs. Prove that you can fill a few rides first. So everybody has told me, start with a small group, start with a tiny area. Don't start with your whole county, and keep it local with riders and drivers. Even now, it's so hard to fill rides from Loudoun County to DC if people want to drive in their neighborhood. And so make sure that the way you're starting is not your entire gigantic region, but maybe a church where people know each other and are going to drive each other. I think one thing I learned too in talking to other areas like programs in Iowa and programs in Washington State is we formalize these relationships, but these relationships are already happening. People are already driving people to church who can't get there. People are already driving their neighbors to the grocery store. And so we are increasing those rides and formalizing it and expanding it, but this is happening, and finding places where it's already happening kind of organically is where you're going to be able to get people to recruit other volunteers, because it's already going on. People already have mutual aid networks that are less formal than NV Rides. So in terms of making a plan, these are kind of the specifics, and I'd love, anybody jump in. I'm no expert, I'm just sharing what we have. So you do need umbrella insurance for your organization. If you already have insurance, you can contact who insures you and talk about umbrella insurance, describe the program. And it's a unique ask, so you'll have to kind of get a custom quote, but you need umbrella insurance. You need background checks for your drivers. Verifying license and insurance is important. We collect all that in Ride Scheduler. It's all managed in there. It's not like I'm taking pictures with my cell phone. It's all entered in a secure database. And then we use background check systems that provide electronic background checks. And then we enter that too in our Ride Scheduler. One other thing I learned in this role, and I think is really important, maybe the most important, is establishing guidelines. You don't have to be everything to everyone. Your organization may only want to drive people to your church or to medical appointments, or maybe only wants to drive veterans, and that's okay. You don't have to. I think starting really, really big is where you have a hard time. It's hard to be everything to everyone. So establish what you want to do. Do you want to do medical rides? Are you okay with social outings, errands, and say what you can and can't do? And it's okay to say no, because I think you'll learn if you start a program like this. You can't anticipate everything. There are so many kinds of rides that are going to come up that you're going to have to make a judgment on, but have an idea of where you want to position yourself and who you can help and who maybe is not a good fit for your program. And I think another thing, and I can definitely go into this more offline if anybody has questions, but you should have a plan for sedation, anesthesia, and hospital discharges. Some of our partners do it, some don't. Some do it if you bring your own caregiver, some do it for known riders, but not new riders. But I can tell you from experience, this is a huge percentage of the requests you get. And it's a hard judgment call to make, right? Are you signing someone out of the hospital? That's kind of a lot, right? If a person's going to go home to an empty house, but you're their caregiver, it's maybe too big of an ask, but you're going to get a lot of calls like that. So have an idea of where your organization wants to position itself and how you're going to address those requests. And I think a really good first step is knowing where maybe you would refer those requests. Or if you want to do them, what maybe your guidelines are. There are certain procedures you do and certain ones you don't, or do you do dental, or have an idea of where you want to stand. And I also learned from our partners, you need to have a transportation coordinator. It can be a volunteer. It doesn't need to be someone who's paid. NV Rides has myself, I'm full-time, and then we have one half-time employee, Julie, who helps answer our large volume of calls and emails. But you need a transportation coordinator because you want to formalize it for insurance reasons, to protect your volunteers' time and sanity. All the requests need to go through the transportation coordinator. You don't want people, you don't want riders texting the volunteers or, kind of informally organizing it around you and then calling you when the person doesn't come and you didn't even know the request was there. So I definitely recommend a transportation coordinator, even if it's just a few hours a day, even if the person is a volunteer. Everything needs to go through a central system. Email address or phone line is great. We do both, and we just enter it into Ride Scheduler and we return calls. The volunteers need easy access to the transportation coordinator. They're going to have concerns. They're going to ask questions. They're going to want clarification. They're going to want to make sure the address is right. That happens a lot. And they need to know how to reach that person quickly. And they're going to feel more comfortable volunteering if they can reach that person, that they know that person gets back with them. Our transportation coordinator uses our software to manage requests. She enters all the requests. She coordinates riders and drivers. But again, the drivers pick their own rides. It's not that she's assigning them rides, it's that she's entering them and sending out the email blasts. And then answering questions. They're going to email you and call you. And that's great. You want them engaged, but you need someone that they can go through. It's hard to do this without really dedicating a person to this task. So you want to get started. I think these are two really good resources. Project Turnkey via Shepherd Center. It's a great toolkit, completely free online, kind of an A to Z of how to start a program. You just do all the steps they have. They tell you how to get insurance. They tell you how to get volunteers. It's really detailed. I love it. I look at it all the time. And then Community Transportation Association of America has really good resources, and they have a map of every program in the country. So sometimes, like, if I have a question about something, I kind of know there might be someone out there. I know someone in Iowa, I know someone in Washington State, I know somebody in Texas, I can get that. But how do you handle this? And they'll get back with me. Kind of a good networking. So we're not the only model. And I think that's also important to say. We serve a specific area. We serve Northern Virginia. You know, everybody's going to be different. Two other models I want to highlight because they're kind of unique is Neighbor Ride in Howard County, Maryland. I did a presentation with them last week. They are covering all of Howard County, and they actually charge for rides, but a very low amount. It's like $6, or I think the max is $10. If you're low income, it's completely free. So it's very generous, but they do charge. It's how they fund themselves, and it's one of the ways they fund themselves. And it also, they feel like people don't cancel rides that way. They like a little accountability that way. So that's an option. It's called Neighbor Ride. They charge very low amounts. The other option, I'm sure some of you know because they're kind of the biggest name in the business, is ITN America. They're out of Portland, Maine. They have a lot of different programs, some of which are paid, some of which are a credit system, but their most famous is people who no longer want to drive, trade in their vehicle to them. And vehicles are worth a lot, so it might be a good time to do it right now. And they get credits for rides that way. So it's kind of giving up your vehicle in exchange for rides when you're a senior who no longer wants to drive. So it's another model to think about if that's like a way you would want to fund yourself. So I want to say that I'm available. I want community transportation to be possible. I'm really excited about this. I mean, we're allowing people to age in place and navigate aging in place without it being really expensive, and creating community, which is huge. People are isolated and we create community. We've made a ton of free training videos on YouTube. I can drop the links for people or send them to Martina, but they are boundaries with drivers, safe driving, fall prevention, how to handle a rider who's cognitively impaired or has dementia. And they're all really professionally done by people who have a lot of experience in the volunteer ride space. And then our email address that goes to myself and my colleague is info@nvrides.org. And please feel free to reach out if you need to try and coordinate a ride, or also, but if you have other questions too. So I see people have asked questions and been chatting, and I thank you so much for listening to my talk and engaging with me. I'm going to try and look at the Q&A. Okay.
I feel like you've answered a lot of these throughout. So if you want to kind of skim through them, while you skim through them, I'll also remind people that if people want to ask questions, if people want to unmute and ask questions, we would love for you to do that. You just have to if you just click that raise hand icon, that will alert me that you'd like to ask a question live or comment something to Emily, and we can allow you to unmute, and you can even turn your camera on and we can see your smiling face and you can share a question or a comment with us. Emily, do you see a question in here that you want to follow up on?
Yeah, I have tons. I give these talks a lot, and always my number one question is about insurance and liability. And I will start by
that one.
It varies by state. And so I got somebody's question about they require insurance for trans. It just depends on your state requirements. I know here you can just have normal insurance. We do verify that you have insurance, but it's up to the driver what type of insurance they select. We don't require it to be anything in particular. And volunteer drivers are able to avoid state, commercial driver's license requirements. They are not charging for their services, and they're only driving their own personal vehicle. We don't allow them to drive like county vehicles or anything. You would still need a commercial driver's license for that. So limiting exposure liability wise, I mentioned we have that umbrella policy, and every organization has an umbrella policy, and that's negotiated with their insurer. It's negotiated based on what other services you provide, right? So it's if you're providing handy helper services, that may be insured in addition to the driving. So that's a good question, but umbrella policy is definitely the answer. And you have to just, because it's not like a standard thing, you have to talk to whoever your insurance broker is. And I know we went through this, and I just had to explain what we do basically, and they were able to provide services. Have you gotten people's frequent requests for people to get to food pantries or Dulles? Yes, we have gotten frequent requests to get to food pantries. We did 8,000 services in Loudoun County last year, and many of them are to Dulles South Food Pantry and Loudoun Hunger Relief. So yeah, it's definitely, those are really popular destinations, are food pantries. People mostly want rides or really wish they could have what they need. I would say people mostly want rides. Some people want food deliveries, but mostly people want to pick their own stuff. The reason we've had to do a lot of deliveries is like efficiency and like crowding kind of things. Like if, you know, if somebody has COVID or is COVID exposed, we have to deliver their food. Or if somebody, you know, if there's capacity limits and we need to get out a lot of, you know, emergency food or something, then we're going to end up delivering it. But people generally want to go and pick their own stuff. Chris Blankenship says, what is the name of this ride scheduling software? So it's called Ride Scheduler. It's awesome. It's designed by Steve Ewert out of San Diego. And it's very convenient to use. I can give you his contact information, and he provides, because he does it himself, he provides like real tech support. I email him and I ask for customization and it happens. It's really great. It's probably one of our biggest strengths is that Ride Scheduler. Alan says, your volunteer drivers handle clients might be discharged. Do your volunteers? So that's a hard question. Some volunteer drivers do, particularly the villages where people have a little bit more, they're more vetted. They drive from an outpatient day procedure, but generally it's a little harder. I would say that's not a service that we really emphasize, except maybe our villages. Some of our shepherd centers do very low risk outpatient day procedures, but a lot of times that's crossing into where you might need a paid caregiver, especially if you need someone to stay with you at home for 4 hours or something. So that is a little challenging. We definitely do it, and I hear of it all the time, but it's not something I would like guarantee we could offer because of the partner's variability and volunteer availability. This sounds like so much like our program, but I'm curious how your friendly visit and friendly calling is counted. Part of your program certainly, but not an occupied ride. So we allow our partners to do whatever they want with Ride Scheduler. And that's one of our challenges is they can use it to schedule anything, including like friendly visitor. We can tease out ride type. And so we do collect the data kind of separately. But I would say friendly visitor is still a very small percentage of our rides. We mostly drive people places. Brian says, could you expand on the cloud-based software? Is there any sort of AI that suggests rides? No, there's no AI that suggests rides. Each driver is part of a specific partner organization, and they can only see the rides available in that specific organization and region. They're not volunteers for all of NV rides. They're only to one organization. So they actually pick the rides themselves from emails they get from their specific partner organization. Is your cloud-based system your own creation or something off? It's something off the shelf. It's called Ride Scheduler and it's tailored to our needs. If we get a copy of this deck, sure, I would be happy to send it to you. Why do you have to have a plan for sedation, anesthesia, hospital discharges? Because you're going to get so many requests. I know for me, when I'm on the phone with people, I want to like have an answer. And so I think you should have an idea of if it's something you can entertain, great. If the answer is no, per your organization policy, you want to have a plan. You don't want to take like 10 calls your first day and then have to call everybody back. And you're going to get so many requests for that. So you want to have an idea. If I were you, I would have a plan. At least, you know, you're the board of whatever nonprofit you're on, or your legal team or your insurer or whatever, you want to have an idea of how you're going to go into it because you're going to get requests. I hate being blindsided. Do volunteer drivers have to follow all ADA guidelines? That's a good question. They don't, I mean, they can pick who they drive, so they don't have to drive anyone if they don't want to. They can just decide they don't want to drive in all of 2021 and we don't even say anything. We don't really offer information about protected statuses. Like we don't have people's you know, information in there that they could really discriminate on that basis. They do have to follow, you know, guidelines in terms of, you know, if somebody has a cane or something, they need to help them maybe put it in their trunk or something, but they they're picking rides based on whatever, based on where the person is and the time of day, and maybe if they know the person, but we don't have any protected status information in there that I can think of. Maybe I'm wrong. What about rides for people in assisted living? Yeah, assisted living, as long as the person is independently ambulatory, there's no reason they couldn't request a ride. We don't provide lift assistance, so they would have to be able to get in the car. Is the scheduling software proprietary? Yes, and that we pay for it. So you'd have to talk to Steve and negotiate a contract with him. But yes, he has lots of other people using it. I know in San Diego, there's a ton of ride programs that use it. So it's great, and he's not only beholden to us, but as a previous insurance agent, not everyone qualified for umbrella policies. What other alternatives do we have? So just to be clear, the volunteer drivers, to my knowledge, don't need an umbrella policy. The organization needs an umbrella policy, but I'm not an insurance agent. That's only from what's been explained to me. Good. Here. I have a question about the software. What do you answer the phone? How do you know which partner? So we have a map on our website, nvrides.org. And so we don't have it doesn't have a search function. I wish it did, but I came into it with a static map from Google Maps. But I look at people, I ask them if it's okay for their address. I type it into Google Maps and I compare it to our map. So I see where they live relative to what partner might serve their area, and then I help refer them. And then can companions of the clients accompany them on the rides? Absolutely. And we, as long as we'll type it in the ride request. So we'll say Mrs. So-and-so wants to ride with her son, so the person picking up the ride knows it's two people, in the car. But yeah, we definitely allow that. And sometimes the drivers prefer it because if the person is maybe cognitively impaired, or they're going to be getting a huge load of groceries, they feel like it's nice to have somebody else helping them in the car. So yeah, that's pretty common, I would say. There's no reason that somebody can't accompany them on the ride.
Emily, we have two of our guests that want to ask questions.
Sure, yeah.
Let's see. Melissa Wender, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, I'm the person from the food bank, and the interesting thing about coordinating this is I imagine that your role is completely overwhelming. Do you sit in front of a big map so you know which organization to hook the person up with? And, does it get confusing, or are you doing it through Google Maps, or does the program itself suggest who to pass them on to?
I unfortunately am doing it through Google Maps. If anybody wants to donate their time or expertise, I would love something to search, but right now it's Google Maps. It's not uncommon. If any of our partners are on this call, they know I do email and say, would you serve X address, sometimes to verify.
And are there a lot of cancellations to drivers, and then you're getting calls, or more specifically, have you ever personally felt you need to go give someone a ride because their driver fell through and,
No, I'm sure our partners have, but kind of in my role, I'm sort of step back from actually the rides, if that makes sense. I'm sure, yeah, I think some of our ride coordinators have, absolutely. And then there's also subsidies we have for taxi cabs. Fairfax County has a new subsidy coming out. So sometimes we're linking people to programs if they really have a high volume of requests and we can't possibly get a driver. We'll say, yeah, we'll get a volunteer, and then we're also going to ask you to do this program because they're going to provide you a taxi voucher.
All right, thank you, Melissa. Our next question, we had J.M. O'Connell, but I guess that person had to step away. Paula Martin, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. I think this is a marvelous service. I just think it's just really great. I work for the Virginia Assistive Technology System, and I get 2 to 3 calls a week for accessible vans, and there's just no money out there. So I didn't know if you had a resource where you would send someone in a wheelchair or that uses a power chair or manual chair for transportation. Thank you.
Yeah, within Fairfax County, it would be typically Fairfax County. In other counties, it is definitely more challenging, and sometimes we're reaching out to the area agency on aging and seeing what they have available, or if they know a private company. I can tell you, sadly, it's not always free, and that's hard. But it's very individualized. Those are very challenging calls.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. JM, if you still have your question, you are able to unmute and ask.
Oh, all right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm just a potential future user, and I'm wondering about the geographic range for some of these organizations. Like if you are in Fairfax, but you need to go to a medical appointment in Arlington or vice versa, do these groups kind of cross county borders?
Yeah, they do. There's no rules that they can only drive in a certain county. We look at origin point by counting the county. We look like if we want to count it as a Fairfax County ride, we look if it started in Fairfax County. I can tell you those rides are harder to get picked up. If you need to go an extremely long distance, it's going to be challenging. It's not that we can't do it, we do it, but it's harder.
No, it's just, it strikes me that it wouldn't be uncommon that someone would be in Arlington and need to go to Fairfax, or someone in Fairfax needs to go to say a doctor in Arlington is all.
Oh yeah, of course. And that happens, especially because the border is like, Falls Church in Arlington. Sometimes that's like a local doctor to you. So yeah, we don't have any problem crossing like county lines or, taking people to pretty much anywhere a volunteer is willing to go, we'll do it. It's not like it is limited to a certain jurisdiction, but the origin point is often limited. Like if you're in city of Fairfax or something, or in Fairfax, in Shepherd Center, McLean, Arlington, Falls Church, your origin address has to be in one of those areas, but your destination can be open-ended.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, Emily, thank you so much for being with us. And I think this has been a wonderful presentation. We've had so many questions and so much great interaction. I did put in the chat that people have suggested some other similar organizations throughout the state. And if people want to share those, as always, people have asked about the slides and the recording. We always do follow up with an email to everyone who registered, whether you could attend or not. We follow up with an email that has a link to the recording on our YouTube page, as well as the slides and any other resources that Emily can provide us. But as always, if there are similar resources similar to this throughout the state that you want to share with us, we're happy to include those in our follow-up email. So if you want to send those, you can send those to martina@vgcoa.com, and I'd be happy to include those because resources like this, I think, are just really important to our audience. And the more we can share, the stronger this webinar series makes us. As always, again, just, shameless plug, we're always looking for exciting new webinar topics and presenters. And that's how we got Emily. She reached out to us and wanted to present. And I'm so glad you did. So thank you so much for joining us. And I thank you guys, and we'll see you again on March 22nd. Emily, any closing thoughts or words before we hop off for the day?
Well, thank you, everyone. I will be sending all the links I promised to Martina, and feel free to email me. I'm totally available.
Wonderful. Well, we'll share your email address, all your contact information, and thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.